Okay, then I would like to call to order regular council meeting number 1530 for January 12th. And in honor of the Liuwat-Tool, the Village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Liuwat Nation. This meeting of council is being held virtually with all meeting participants attending via electronic communications in order to adhere to the PHO orders respecting physical distancing requirements as a measure to prevent the transmission of COVID-19. Council members will be involved in and participate in the meeting virtually as they would in person. For those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and is being recorded. A recording of the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. Council members attending the meeting are required to verbally advise the chair when they leave the meeting and return to the meeting so that this can be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. For clarity, if a council member does not verbally advise the chair but is observed to be absent from their video feed for an extended period of time, and their video feed remains turned on, and it is unclear to staff whether they are present in the meeting, the council member will be marked absent from the meeting until such time as staff observes the council member reappear. Members of the public who wish to ask questions during open question period at the end of the meeting will be able to do so, and I will provide instructions at the time. With that, I would look to council for any amendments to the agenda. Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Motion to approve.
Noble, second by Councillor Zant. All in favor, opposed, motion carries. Adoption of minutes from regular council meeting 1529 from Tuesday, December 8th. Moved by Councillor Zant, seconded by Councillor Craddock. All in favor, opposed, motion carries. Business arising. We don't have any rise of the report. Nothing from committee of the whole or committee meetings, and no delegations. So we'll go right into the report from the office of the CAO. Ms. Gilmore.
Oh, good evening, everyone. I wanted to take this opportunity, our first meeting of the year, to do some introductions of staff. And I see they are all waiting as well. Just to introduce you to our new familiar faces. Are we bringing them all in at the same time?
May as well.
Okay. So I'll just wait till everyone gets in and then I will introduce you to all of them. Okay, there we go. All right, so we actually have 4 individuals who have joined our team. We have to wait until February 2nd to meet Elena. She will, I can't remember, is it the 2nd, Sheena? Is that when we're bringing Elena in?
Yes, if we can, probably at a committee of the whole, because she has she teaches Spanish in the evenings on Tuesday.
There we go. So I'm just going to go in order who's on my screen first, and I want to introduce everyone to Emily White. She started last Monday, so a week and 2 days ago, and she is a new HR coordinator and executive assistant. So welcome, Emily. This is everyone.
Welcome.
Next is Vinka Hutchison. So she's been with us since December. I can't remember the official date. Sorry, Vinka. But she's 7th. Okay. So she's hit the ground running like all of the other individuals you're seeing here tonight. She is our new communication and grant coordinator. So welcome to the village, Vinka.
Welcome.
And last but not least, we have Laura Murphy. She has started with us. She started last Tuesday. Is that correct? Or Wednesday? Tuesday, yes. And so she is our new project and research coordinator. So I'd like to welcome Laura.
Welcome to all 3 of you. I'm sure I speak for everybody when we look forward to meeting you all in person. As Nikki said, I'm sure you guys hit the ground running because, you know, we've got a few things going on around here and a few files going. So welcome, and we really look forward to working with all of you, and hopefully we'll see you all soon. So thanks very much for coming out.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, then we're going to move on to a verbal report on Bang the Table. So I believe
That'll be me.
Yeah, I thought Vinka was staying with us for that.
Actually, yeah, she could have, and Lisa could have too. I see she popped in and popped back out. So this is our new online platform for consultation. We are just populating it right now. We were hoping to have it ready a little bit earlier but we're just wanting to make sure that it looks right and has all the content. We're going to launch it on our affordable housing consultation that we're going to be having starting next week. We're going to have a stakeholder group meeting. And so this will be same theme as Have Your Say that we've used before. And so we've populated with affordable housing. There'll be an opportunity for people to engage and get information, leave information. And we've also done some little teasers on some other upcoming consultation that we have, which would be for the climate action plan that is being launched in February, and just sort of a placeholder on the launch of the OCP, which obviously those two documents will inform as we go forward. So it's a great opportunity for online engagement. This is something we've been toying with the idea, I'm going to say, for at least a year. Well, I'm going to say more because I don't know where 2020 went, but it wasn't part of the thinking back. It could even be 2 or 3 years that we've been thinking about looking at this type of engagement model. So it'll also be augmented with surveys. And as I mentioned, some at this point Zoom meetings, but when we can resume in-person meetings, that's something that will complement this as well. So we're going to be sending some information out. I'll share it with you all as well, so you can click on it and have a look and see where we go. So we're excited to launch this this week, and we'll see what the public thinks of it as well. Hopefully we'll get some feedback on it. So I just wanted to flag it with you guys.
So, Ms. Gilmore, when you say you're launching it this week, on what are we? Is it just a launch to introduce the platform, or is it on a particular project or issue that we're going to trial it on? Something?
It will be on affordable housing
Right away.
right away. Absolutely. And then, but right now it's not accessible to the public. So when we say launch it, we'll open it staff. So it would be Vinca, so Ms. Hutchison, Ms. Pedrini, and Ms. Reese, who are populating all of the information to getting it to go live. So I'm not 100% certain of the inner workings of it. Again, as you mentioned, we're just as brand new to the organization. A lot of other municipalities are using it and have been using it. So we just look forward to be able to help to get another piece that can help with the consultation and reaching out to the community.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Any questions? Right. Anything else on your verbal report?
No, I do not have anything else.
All right. Can I get a motion to receive your report? Councillor Zant, seconded by Councillor Noble. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Gilmore. We're on to bylaws. First and second readings of the Village of Pemberton zoning bylaw 832, retaining wall regulations. We have Mr. Chalmers and is Ms. Virginia? Yeah, there she is. Perfect. I will turn it over to you guys to present.
Thank you, Mayor Richmond. Good evening, Council. Happy New Year to you all. The bylaw in front of you tonight, bylaw number 892-2021, is we're seeking first and second reading to that bylaw, and it's a follow-up to a matter that the Committee of the Whole dealt with, and Council received their recommendation back in December of 2020. And specifically, it's related to retaining wall heights and retaining wall matters. Council may recall, or the Committee of the Whole may recall, Council may recall that the Committee of the Whole received a report from staff outlining a number of hillside development issues, a lot of the progress that's being made in terms of how we regulate developments on the hillside in a manner that meets Council's objectives as outlined in the hillside development guidelines, but also does so in a way that respects and reacts to the realities of hillside development. And one of the specific issues that was identified in that report were the limitations in the current zoning bylaw provisions respecting retaining wall heights. Currently, the zoning bylaw has a maximum retaining wall height of 1.2 meters. Anything above that would require a variance, or the retention would need to be broken into multiple retaining walls, which, given the size of typical residential properties, becomes a real challenge. We addressed that matter with Committee of the Whole, and their recommendation, which was endorsed by Council later that evening, was that we be directed to undertake a review of retaining wall provisions. And in that initial report, staff outlined an approach that would be effectively a hybrid between the pre-existing zoning provisions which existed before July 2018, where effectively there was a requirement for engineering of retaining walls over 2.4 meters in height, and the current provisions which had a maximum height of 1.2 meters. So bylaw 892 has been a reaction to what we heard at Committee of the Whole in our discussions with the developers of hillside sites and some of the ultimate owners and builders. And the bylaw before you proposes 3 changes to the current zoning bylaw. The first is an effective elimination of a maximum height provision and replacing it with a requirement that any retaining wall over 1.2 meters in height be designed by a qualified engineer. That would imply that they design and then supervise the construction of it. That will largely be administered through the building permit approvals process. The second is a requirement for landscaping for any retaining wall over 1.2 meters in height. So what that means is council can employ the landscape provisions powers that you have in zoning to require that a feature like this be screened by a vegetative buffer or other means. That's the provision that we have added as the second amendment. And the third amendment was, again, a bit of a cleanup. There was some question and some lack of clarity around how retaining walls ought to be sited. And what we've made clear in this amendment is that retaining walls may be sited on any portion of a lot. So that means that they don't oblige by setbacks. So as staff understand it, these are the amendments that would enable hillside development to proceed. I will remind council that when we dealt with this matter, we also acknowledged that there's been a significant change in the way that the municipality does deal with retaining structures and will deal with them in the future. Those will have future developments, including some of the in-stream developments like Sunstone and the Ridge, will be obliged to take out development permits as part of their subdivision approvals process. And through that, we'll be looking at comprehensive site retention. So we don't envision that this amendment will necessarily result in a significant change over the business as anticipated under that regime. But what it will do is it'll allow the current lots that have been subdivided and transacted to private ownership to be constructed in a manner more similar to the previous zoning bylaw than the current one. And with that, Mr. Mayor, we'd be open to any questions you may have. Tonight, we're seeking first and second reading and then the establishment of a public hearing should council wish to proceed with the bylaw.
You're on mute, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chalmers. As you mentioned, Committee of the Whole direction was, was to sort of do a hybrid version, as you put it. I was a little surprised that the maximum height was eliminated entirely. I know it's hard to establish what is an appropriate height depending on what the site is. And I know we're referring to a lot of, sort of midterm as opposed to future development or in-stream, but I'm just curious. So would that mean that if somebody came forward with a plan for, pick a number, a 5-meter retaining wall, as long as that wall is engineered properly, as long as it meets the engineering requirements, it would therefore be allowed with this zoning? Is that correct?
Mayor Richmond, in theory, that's the case. Now, what we are largely dealing with are lots that we know. We know the terrain on which they're being subdivided. We don't anticipate that we're going to end up in that type of situation with massively disruptive retention. Most of the sites that we will fall under these provisions without the regulation and approval of council through a development permit or other means is quite limited, and it is known. So we wouldn't anticipate that. What we would see, and I will also make the point that under the pre-2018 zoning bylaw, that was also the same regulation. There was no maximum in that bylaw. It was a trigger point for having a qualified professional design and supervise the construction of the wall. So we've taken the same approach, and the rationale, as you outlined, Mr. Mayor, is really at this stage, although we don't anticipate massive retaining structures, we don't know what the right height would be. We could choose, when we did have some discussion at staff level and at the Committee of the Whole around perhaps a 2.4 meter maximum. Well, what do we do then if a wall is 2.5 meters? Have we really addressed the matter and resolved the issue that we were hoping this amendment would resolve? So this, I can assure you, is an issue and a matter that will go under further scrutiny and further study as we evolve the hillside development guidelines into development permit areas and other things through the official community plan review. And I would anticipate that at some point in the future, there may be more clarity in the village regulations around things like a maximum and that sort of thing. However, in this limited range of cases, we have enough information about the land to be able to make a quasi-informed decision. Although we cannot pick a number, we don't expect there will be egregious incidents of retention. And then council will utilize its development permit powers for future hillside sites. So through that, you will have the power to regulate and control anything higher than 1.2 meters.
Through future hillside developments, but the current ones or anything that's sort of in the midterm, as I'm calling it, again, if there is no limit to it, I guess, sir, let me phrase it as a question. Are you through development permit, or are there any other triggers or points that would allow council and or staff to decide whether the height of a retaining wall is appropriate on the site? We've eliminated from our zoning bylaw with this draft. Is there another point where we could, where again, council could look at it and say, well, that makes sense, or that doesn't?
Mr. Mayor, for that limited number of lots that have gone through a subdivision approvals process, and are sitting at building permit and will not trigger a development permit, the short answer is really no. But those lots have been subdivided, have gone through a subdivision approvals process where, although the review of the grading and the retention was not to the level that we would anticipate in future approvals, those lots were reviewed, and the layout of the roads they did use established grades. And we have some of that information, enough to be able to confidently say that we will probably see a continuation of the type of retention we've seen at the Ridge and at Sunstone over the last months and years. We wouldn't anticipate that we would have a trigger. And as discussed, we were challenged to come up with what the right number would be for a retaining structure with the information we have available. We have enough to say that those are buildable lots. We don't have enough to be able to say they will require 1.75 or 2.25 meters of retention per lot at this stage.
Okay, thank you. I've got more questions, but I'm going to open up to council. Councilor Craddock.
Thanks very much, Mayor Richmond. And I guess that was one of the concerns I had. One of my three concerns was no maximum height on what they're going to be allowed. And with that, it's going to show some inconsistency of elevation of neighboring lots. Someone wants to build a ranch or no basement, they may put 7 meters of fill in. Person that's going to build a 2-story house might put 3 meters of fill in, and the people down below are going to be looking at quite a hodgepodge, and what I would suggest isn't going to be the nicest looking neighborhood. But the other thing I'm wondering about through Mr. Chalmers, if a person builds, let's pick something, a 7-meter wall, and you're suggesting it needs to be vegetated so that it softens it somewhat, that would have to be on both sides and obviously the downhill. So are we going to require a setback so that they can have room to plant?
Mr. Mayor, through you, what this would require would be that in order to achieve a retaining wall over 1.2 meters, they would have to make provision for landscaping. So although we're not setting a numeric requirement, we are suggesting that they would have to landscape within their own private property, which would imply a setback. Unless there was another means of screening that we haven't thought of at this stage, then yes, they would have to set the walls back sufficiently to achieve a landscape strip as per the bylaw.
Okay, thank you. And just to follow up, Mayor Richmond, that would be also on the sides if the neighbors decide not to create a retaining wall. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, sorry, pardon me. I don't know if I captured that question entirely.
So the downhill side, if you put 7 meters in, you'd have to set it back to put landscaping in. That wall will also have to go up the sides of the property because it's going to be otherwise a problem. So they would have to set back that also. That's just what I want to be assured of.
Mr. Mayor, the way I would interpret the amendment we've put forward is that any section of any retaining wall over 1.2 meters would require landscaping.
Thank you very much.
Other questions or comments from council? Okay, I'll carry it on. I do struggle a little bit with the no limit. I recognize that it's hard to pick a number. I do feel like we've left a door a little bit too wide open in terms of what might be allowed. I guess I misinterpreted when I understood we were going for this hybrid approach, so to speak. I thought we were gonna, there would be other ways to sort of evaluate the appropriateness of the size of a retaining wall. I don't know what that is. But I am going to express some concerns over, if you could meet the engineering requirements, the fact that you could build again, pick a number, a really large retaining wall, worries me a little bit. I feel like we need some more parameters on that somehow. I do get that the lots are all different, and I get that we are in midstream with some of these, and that we're going to look at a more holistic and far-sighted approach when we're looking at the continued development on the hillside in terms of how we do deal with retention. Totally appreciate that. But I do worry that we've left this a little too wide open. I kind of would like to see staff sort of work out some sort of, I don't want to force developers or builders or residents to have to come back every 10 minutes to say, well, what about this? Or how about that height? I want it to make sense, and I don't do the work you do. So I don't know what that looks like, but I do feel the door is a little bit wide open at this point. So those would be my comments. Yeah, again, I'll look to council for further comments or direction here. Councillor Noble, then Councillor Craddock.
I agree with your concerns, Mayor Richmond. Primarily that what's the trigger point of it affecting a neighbor? If you have two giant walls and someone in between. I've seen that in other communities, and I'm just concerned if there's anything we can do to mitigate that without putting too much constraints on what people need to be able to build their lots.
Councillor Craddock.
Thanks very much. And through to Mr. Chalmers, I'm just throwing this out there for your thought. Would it be easier to put a percentage of slope? So in other words, if from the top of your property to the bottom of your slope, it's 20 feet, and a person says maximum capacity is 40%, could a person work on a percentage basis according to the slope? They're going back to old math way back when. Does that make any sense, or is that just crazy?
Mr. Mayor, through you, there are a number of different metrics and ways that we could determine a maximum height or a percentage of slope or what have you. And if council wants us to do that, I would suggest you just refer the bylaw back to us with that instruction. We took away from committee of the whole after a discussion around the maximum height that we would not be pursuing that at this time. So that's the bylaw that's been prepared. Now, if on reflection, council would like to see how we can better interface between lots and those things, it is a different level of study. It's not an imminent turnaround time. And as we expressed to council, there are a number of potentially pending development variance permits, which will likely come before you. But if that's the approach that you want to take, we would need that sent back to us to do the work in a comprehensive way. And that's certainly well within council's purview.
Thank you. Is there another way to approach? I mean, like you said, there's a number of metrics that can be applied, and that would take some work from staff to sort of, work through that a little bit and bring it back to council. And like you said at the outset, we're looking at a more far-sighted approach to the rest of hillside development. So I don't want to spend too much staff time and all of our resources just on the midterm. But so my question is there another way we could look at? I mean, a big part of this is obviously the aesthetics. We have addressed through this bylaw the engineering component. I like the landscaping requirements. I like the siting requirements that have been brought forward in this amendment. I'm good with all that. Is there another way to address the aesthetics or appropriateness to the natural landscape? Is that through advisory design review? Is there another way that, over a certain level, walls can be looked at so that they are not, you know, we've seen developments on hillsides go many different ways. I can think of a couple examples in our corridor, without being really specific, where I've always said to myself, I really hope our hillside, we have to make sure our hillside development doesn't look like that. So again, that's the far-sighted approach and the holistic approach that we'll take moving forward. For this interim bit, is there another way that we can make sure that the aesthetics and the natural landscape are preserved if it's not by implementing those sorts of metrics?
Mr. Mayor, through you, that has proven to be our challenge. That's why we brought forward the committee of the whole report. Because going forward, we would anticipate development permit area guidelines that get quite specific around what council would like to see and the community would like to see for retention and development on hillside sites. At this point, however, what we're really challenged by is we're dealing with 60, 70 foot frontages. We're dealing with existing subdivided lots. And it poses a challenge because a lot of the ways that you can work with a topography or that you can retain in more subtle ways is done more at a street scale or a neighborhood scale than at a lot scale. And that's really where this whole challenge has come up. These are approvals that were started many, many, many years ago. And the thinking was not as thorough as it is now about how these may look. And the result is we have a number of individual lots on the hillside that are going to struggle to come up with building envelopes, and that some owners were unaware that we would be approaching retention the way that we have when they made their commitments, when they thought about their yards and their house plans, where it's created a bind, quite frankly, because those tools at a building permit stage, Mr. Mayor, don't really exist. The way the Local Government Act is structured is that your best tool for dealing with how the form and character of things is a development permit. When it gets to building permit scale, there's very little review beyond the more technical code-based and zoning bylaw matters that the building official reviews in issuing permits than with aesthetic. And typically council's not involved at that scale.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. So maybe one last question, and I'm gonna look to the council again for more direction. So if we were to send this zoning bylaw back to staff with the concern, again, personally, I'm good with the landscaping, the siting and all the aspects, but what we're sort of centered on right now is the concern over unlimited retaining walls. What does that work look like? Is it, how feasible is it? Again, we're talking about different levels of planning here, from the longer term to the shorter term, those applicants and development permits that have already been put in place. What does that look like for staff? If we said, go back, give us some metrics, something that we could work with, that we feel comfortable won't allow for ridiculously unattractive retaining walls.
Mr. Mayor, through you, I think, there's a lot, it could be a significant amount of work. And I imagine it would be more, we would need a better understanding of what council believes would be a problematic wall. So for example, a wall that's backing into a forested area that's not visible from a street, there may be a different tolerance for that than one that's right at the main intersection of a community. And that's where it becomes challenging to pick one size fits all. Right. We would look at the grading to look at really what are we challenged with topographically, but what we don't know is what each individual purchaser has envisioned for their lot and what they may wish to do with their retention. So the challenge would be we can certainly, we have the ability and can make the time to do the work. It's that at the end of the day, whatever metric we pick is likely not going to fit every project. And we brought this forward largely because we sensed that council was going to begin to see a number of development variance permits for a bylaw that I think we all agree isn't the right bylaw right now. It needs to be changed. But part of the rationale for that change at this point was to test where council wanted to go in terms of compelling variances. Because, Mr. Mayor, I guess that would be your tool if you wanted to see retaining walls at a certain height and look at them for aesthetics, would be to set a maximum height and compel variance applications for any wall higher than that. So that's, where we set that height, no matter how much study we do, there'll be an element of judgment and applied to what that maximum height would be.
And as you said, it could be prescribed or specific enough that hillside facing retaining walls compared to, southern facing walls or streetscape facing walls, those could be, have different requirements. So if it's cut into the edge of a slope that nobody sees facing on the back because you have to, that could have different requirements. But I mean, can you get that specific?
Mr. Mayor, yes, there's often, when you look at fence heights as an analogy, often there's differential fence heights for front yard and rear yard. To put it in a zoning bylaw term, we could look at different tolerances for front, rear, and side yards. Again, the technical execution of the zoning isn't challenging. It's figuring out what to plug in that might take a little bit more work. And I think we would probably need some time with council and the committee of the whole to get a much clearer expression of exactly what those tolerances are.
Mhm.
And I think we would need to advise council that I think no matter what you pick, there would be times where it wouldn't suit a particular site. And you'd likely have to deal with that by variance.
By variance. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I've talked too much. Council, more input. How would you like to take this? Is Councillor Craddock frozen again? Did we lose him? Or he's very still. There he is.
Ms. Pedrini also has her hand up first.
Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Ginny. Yeah, go ahead.
Myself?
Yeah.
Okay, so through you, through the mayor, we could look at retaining the maximum height that we had in our previous zoning bylaw, which was 2.4 meters. Staff are just not sure that that does make sense in a hillside environment, but it was the stated maximum before our new zoning bylaw came into play.
No.
I think that we would need to refer that to actually compare and look at the area instead of setting an arbitrary number, would be my recommendation.
And
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, just for clarity, it wasn't a maximum in the old zoning bylaw. It was a trigger for a geotechnical review.
Oh, yes, sorry.
So the 2.4 meters we've been referencing in the past was not a maximum. And when we conceived, at least at a staff level, of the hybrid, it was to establish a trigger point that's lower than the old bylaw from 2.4 to 1.2 meters, but to take the approach that the old bylaw had, which was to not state an absolute maximum. So that's what we've done in this amendment.
Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Craddock.
Yeah, thanks very much. I hope I don't cut out here. Mr. Chalmers, I'm just wondering, with earth fill lots, would the screening still be the same or the height still be the same?
Mr. Mayor, sorry, for clarity, are you referring to like the retaining walls we saw at Elevate, the earth and the naturescape walls, or earth and fill?
Yeah, earth and fill lots. So we have one out there between two retaining walls. So how does that affected by landscaping and height?
Mr. Mayor, through you, what we would be dealing with is specifically retaining structures. So if there's a structure required to retain earth, such as a rock stack wall, a lock block wall, whatever it may be, a geogrid wall or a Sierrascape wall, like we saw at Elevate, if it's a structural component, it would fall under the purview of the bylaw. If it's sloped earth, you can't slope earth without structure past a certain point, and that would not, the amendment we put forward would not trigger a landscape requirement.
Councillor Craddock. So, I mean, here's our possible directions here. We can ask staff to go back. There's, I think, not a reluctancy, but a caution over picking an arbitrary number, recognizing that the numbers can very much change as to the lot, grading, the aspects, all that sort of thing. So that's a big part of the problem, which means there would still be variances, which is not the end of the world. I believe, if I can paraphrase, that council's biggest concern is scarring retaining walls on the hillside that are visible from below, visible from neighbors, visible from the highway, all that sort of thing. So how do you want to deal with this, council? We can ask staff to come back with some other options to how to look at it and bring it back to a committee of the whole at this point. You know, again, we're recognizing that this is dealing with a certain amount of lots that are already in stream, and then we're going to move on from there. But so I'm looking to the rest of you for some direction here. I think Councillor Craddock, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much. Is there any possibility that those that are on stream have building permits but have been stop work ordered because of these walls? Is there any way we can work through those and then send this back to committee of the whole for a little bit more conversation? I certainly don't want to hold any more people up from building. Some have been waiting for 6 months, maybe even longer. But at the same time, I certainly want to make sure not only ourselves, but Councillor Antonelli, who put a good letter in with her concerns as part of this conversation. So I'm not sure that's possible, but I'd certainly like throw it through to Mr. Chalmers to see if that makes any sense at all.
Mr. Mayor, through you, the approach that we've collectively taken was to bring forward a bylaw amendment to address not just those ones that are under stop work order, but the ones that we know are imminently pending. The owners, we've had good dialogue with the owners, and they are aware that they have development variance permit abilities. But the reason for the stop work orders at this point is because their walls are non-compliant with the current bylaw. So really the best approach, if council wanted to be more deliberative in the zoning amendment, would be to, staff could encourage those applicants to make development variance permit applications and until the zoning amendment is done. Again, we've advised them that was an option throughout. They could wait for council to deliberate an amendment or make their application. That choice was theirs. As far as I'm aware, the applicants who are most directly affected decided to wait for the outcome of this session. So there are several different ways that those individual properties could proceed, but there's really no way short of a zoning amendment that we would be able to do it on the villages by an initiative of the village other than change the zoning that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Well, I think, council's pretty sensitive to a few things here. Sensitive to the long-term plan. We're sensitive to those that are in stream and that are about to land on our doorstep. As Councillor Craddock said, we don't want to hold them up indefinitely. And we're sensitive to the fact, again, we want to build a hillside or see the hillside developed in a way that we will be proud of and that fits our landscape and our character forever. So, we don't want to rush either. So I feel from council's hesitancy or reluctancy that maybe our best option is to continue looking at the current applications on a variance level. Again, we respect the how we got here and what people have gone through. So I think that, we'll be very open to looking at those variances and protecting the hillside at the same time. And that maybe we send staff back to come back to a committee of the whole soon with somewhat more limited approach so that we do have the ability to look at the visual aspects of these retaining walls without them being sort of wide open or that door too wide open. Is that a fair representation of how council is feeling at this point?
I agree, yeah.
Councillor
Yes.
Craddock?
Yes, I agree. And if that's a motion, I'll put it on the floor.
Second.
Is that clear enough? Yeah. That's
Nope.
great. Just look.
I need a little more than that.
Yeah, so let's entertain a motion to send staff back with this zoning bylaw to bring it back to a committee of the whole, which will
With options?
with some options, sure, to be able to look at the appropriateness of the heights of retaining walls and how they fit the natural landscape. Is that clear enough for a first motion? Is that clear enough for staff? Let me ask Mr. Chalmers and Ms. Pedrini. Does that make sense as a starting point?
Yeah.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Zant. Further discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. I don't know if the rest needs a motion. Again, I think there's probably some interested people watching this conversation, and I think the message is that we will, in the meantime, continue to we encourage the variances. We'll look at the variances with an open mind to what makes sense for the hillside until we've sorted this out. But I feel like council wants to be thorough and deliberate about it. Am I missing anything, either from a staff perspective or from the council perspective? I'm seeing shaking heads. We're good with that? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chalmers and Ms. Pedrini for that. Appreciate your work on this. Okay. And that takes us all the way to 11 already. Yeah.
That was 11, I think.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, we're on to the mayor's report then. Just let me reset for a second. Hey, I had a hard time figuring out where to start when I was looking at my mayor's report because it's been a month since we met. I hope everybody enjoyed their holiday break. Did get a bit of a break and there's lots going on, but I do want to start, even though some time has passed, I do really want to start by acknowledging the tremendous loss of Graham Haywood to all of us in our community, and once again pass on my sympathies and condolences to Heather and all family and friends of Graham. Many of us have worked quite closely with Graham over the years. He was very respected, very well loved in our community, and it's a huge loss. I personally sent a card. I'm wondering if we can maybe perhaps have a motion to have staff send a card to the family. Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Zant. All in favor, opposed, motion carries. And I think it would be appropriate along those lines, perhaps to even send a similar, not a card, but maybe an email to our colleagues at the SLRD. This has definitely impacted and hurt and hit the staff very hard at the SLRD. Graham was very popular within that organization. So I'd like to just acknowledge their loss as well, if we could, from the staff level.
I think if I could just provide information, many of us from staff have reached out to staff at the SLRD expressing our condolences for their loss as well. We have done that.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, there's a few meetings, some of which have almost, so much has happened since. I'll go very quickly, but I'll start with the Pembroke Valley Emergency Management Committee. We had a meeting second or third week of December before our break. We talked about, we were given a number of updates on some of the projects. So going very quickly, the Arm Canal projects, the outlets and culverts. They've been logging the water levels. The PVDD has been logging the water levels, modeling outlets right now. And the next steps are permitting with the hopes of completing that project by August. Some of the ones in the Liwat neighborhood, the pole yard is carrying on. They've got funding and planning in place, although that's really only a portion of that dike, that work that needs to be done along there. They're hoping to reapply to be able to extend that further along to protect along the slopes of the Birkenhead. Grandmother Slough, there's been funds to study the hydraulics and the fish habitat. And there's ongoing data collection right now, which is great. And that'll allow for a really measured and careful approach to dealing with the Grandmother Slough, as there's a lot of fish habitat in there. There's more seismic testing going to be done on the Miller-Lillooet dike to understand what we'd like to sort of prove out through this is the flood risk through not shoring up this dam as much, or dike is much higher than the risk from earthquake. So that's sort of the goal of this level of seismic testing that's going to go on. There's been a couple of adjustments to some of the funding applications we've jointly made, and a lot of planning. There was a lot of discussion about planning. Kevin Clark, the operational manager from the PVDD, was quite clear that if we're going to access some of the infrastructure grants and federal grants for flood and emergency mitigation, we need more shovel-ready projects, and we need more planning in place to understand, be it hydraulics or fish habitat and that sort of thing, transfer of risk, exploring all options, including things like setback dikes. So that was a big focus of his direction, is to try to get that level of planning done. Yeah, that was about it for that meeting. Had regional district meetings on the 16th of December, started with long service awards. We had a a number of long service awards given out, including, I think, a 25-year service award. We were presented with a development proposal for Liwat Nation, and this is on Main Street. So if you remember the old blue buildings, if you're driving from Pemberton through Mount Currie, on the left-hand side, there was two old blue buildings. So that's sort of space across from the motel there. There's a proposal it's a fee simple property, and the proposal from Liwat is 2 buildings, commercial downstairs, rental apartments upstairs. They're talking about between the 2 buildings, 3 stories, 53 residential units, 6 commercial units. This would require an OCP amendment for the residential. There's a new designation being proposed, a C2 designation being proposed for that. They also would be partnering with BC Housing. They would look at a number of levels of hitting some affordable housing on that continuum again, from market to below market. Included in the application were things like EV charging stations, landscaping, lots of discussion around connectivity and walkability, proximity to services, and the walkability and connectivity. There was a mention on a couple of occasions about the Friendship Trail and wanting to bring that right up to there. So that was good news. It would be great to be able to connect the Friendship Trail from the industrial park to this housing in this part of Mount Currie. Makes total sense. So that was great. Energy reduction, solar, and that sort of thing. So it'll be really interesting to see that project move along through the process. Bylaws that were looked at the board. There was one around affordable housing, an amendment made for a couple of the areas, but what was relevant to Area C, and this came out of a housing needs assessment that was done, I've reported on before. And so the amendment that came from that housing needs assessment was to include duplex and triplex and gentle densification, mobile parks, to include that within the amendment, so that again, to encourage gentle densification in the rural areas and allow for some more housing opportunities there. There was also a discussion around short-term rentals. Again, for all areas, but just for most areas. And this has been a very area specific approach. And on this one, there's a very big difference in terms of what, for instance, the needs and concerns are around short-term rentals in Furry Creek and Area D, as opposed to Pavilion, that area, or Goldbridge and Area A. So there's been a lot of conversation trying to make it fit all the different areas. Specifically for Area C, short-term rentals, there weren't a ton of changes, but basically the way it went down was there was an agreement not to use secondary suites, as that was pulling secondary suites out of the long-term housing inventory, but to allow carriage houses and second dwellings where permitted. And to be able to do this, if a resident would like to have a short-term rental, they would go through a temporary use permit process as opposed to a rezoning process. This would allow a few things. It would allow sort of a testing ground. It wouldn't be attached, therefore, to the title. So, for instance, if a person rezoned and did a great job with a short-term rental and it was very respectful and then sold the property and that zoning goes with the title, somebody else can come in and do a really terrible job, and it's a completely different situation. So the temporary use permit allows for sort of a testing ground or testing period. Somebody could always apply for rezoning if they chose to, but they don't need to in the immediate. The temporary use permit would require similar requirements to what we put forward at the village, things like manager or owner living on site, not absentee, good neighbor agreement, noise restrictions, and parking requirements, neighbor input, again, similar to us, and the ability for neighbors to input after the fact once the TUP has been provided. We were also given the transfer station survey results. So a survey was done about our transfer station. There were only 88 responses, but there's some really good information in there. You can access it if you're interested on the SLRD website. There was thoughts around the hours, level of service, what we do take, what we should take, Should we explore curbside, all that sort of thing. So that's all there in the survey. I'll let you go to that if you're interested. And then we had a delegation from the Squamish Food Policy and just a discussion on the work they're doing to ensure all residents have access to fresh food. I attended a Sea to Sky Hospital Regional District meeting. It's that time of year, it's budget time, and it's also the time of year when we get a presentation from Vancouver Coastal Health. They present to the board their hopes and goals and dreams and all that sort of thing, and then their funding requests from the hospital district. I've reported on this numerous times. There's been a real shift in thinking at the hospital district board from just sort of agreeing with all those requests and handing over the budget to a more local approach to how we spend our hospital or regional hospital dollars, district dollars. So for instance, along that lines, there was decisions made previously to spend $500,000 over the next couple of years updating the Whistler Trauma Room. There was a chunk of the budget put towards improvements on the Squamish General Hospital, doing things like renovating the mental health space, work on the generator, sprinkler works, air compressors, also back in Whistler, heliport de-icing. So a chunk of the budget was put to that. Then we received the presentation from Vancouver Coastal Health. A lot of what their requests were this year were based around capital investments, not surprisingly around aging clinical equipment and infrastructure, as opposed to new priorities or new advances, I would say. There was a fairly extensive ask. I won't list off the things that we didn't look at, but what was agreed as part of our budget would be to help finance the replacement of the radiology fluoroscopy equipment, which is basically like x-rays but better, and from what I understand, a very key service that we provide in an active area like ours, as well as to replace the air-cooled chiller at the Squamish General Hospital. So those are sort of two infrastructure projects that the board agreed to support. And that's over a couple of years to the tune of $760,000. That leaves within the budget, I think it's somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000, depending on how a couple of things shake out for any other local projects. As I've reported before, there was an a decision at the board, which I pushed back a little bit on. I thought it was a little bit tight at this point, but it was agreed on the board to carry on with a requisition increase. I totally agree with the intention of this. The idea is to build a better reserve. Healthcare needs are expensive. These are big numbers, but if we have big needs that come forward, the thinking is we need to have a solid reserve. So it was a little bit aggressive, but the idea is to build that reserve. And while doing so, we already did it to some degree this year, but even do a more robust job of figuring out priority projects for our community. Once we got through budget, we spent a lot of time discussing that plan. How do we coordinate with our local health providers? The Squamish General Hospital, the hospice is a great example. That was financed to a large degree through the hospital district, as well as other funding sources. How do we recognize as a board what the healthcare needs are right now? Everything from de-icing to down the road, i.e. more hospice beds, to more treatment and better treatment and all that sort of thing. So the board is committed to really trying to understand that better, be able to evaluate that better. So as we go through spending our taxpayers' money, we're making sure we're covering, keeping things current and updated. We're covering immediate needs, and we're thinking ahead to the health needs of our community as we grow and we age and we change. So it was a long conversation. Attended the Regional District Committee of the Whole. There was 2 items on that. First was a delegation on from the Climate Impact Consortium. Very interesting presentation. I won't go into it at this point. The main focus of the meeting was our first look at the budget. And just to give you a glimpse of what we're looking at the regional district budget, things were fairly conservative, like most numbers were quite conservative along the budgets. There was a 7%, 7.3%, I think, increase in general government, honestly distributed amongst the region that has a fairly small impact on our taxpayers. There is some new staff there, not a huge amount. It also does, the budgets at this point allow for a 2 point something CPI increase, whereas at this point we're looking at a 0.5, mostly pandemic related, I would assume, but we'll see how that could change the budget moving forward. But it was our first peek at it. There was nothing dramatic to report on that budget. Very few new hires. It was more sort of catching up from last year and trying to fill positions from last year, and a little bit of added staff in general government. We also, actually, I'll leave that for now. I've carried on with my usual meetings with Sea to Sky mayors and Patrick, MP Wheeler and MLA Sturdy. I won't go into detail there. I think it's everything. I've tried to send you guys information on that. I think we're fairly updated, but I have another one on Thursday. VCH meetings have not picked up since the holidays. We're waiting for that to restart, hopefully soon. And that's with all the mayors in the CAOs in the Vancouver Coastal Health Region. And I have a meeting with a joint meeting, a regional meeting with Minister Osborne, the Minister of Municipal Affairs. That's, I think, on the 28th or 29th of January. That's coming up as well. And maybe a couple of, actually, one other thing, I was approached, a committee has been struck to try to figure out a solution to the issue around the CN Trail trespassing, and the fact that we can't cross that bridge, or not legally cross the bridge that leads us to Bathtub Trail. We know that one of our locals got ticketed a few months back, going to visit her daughter's memorial site, and this is sort of what sparked this committee to form. So they reached out to me, knowing that I've been involved in these discussions in the past. I don't have a ton to report, but I just did, I've asked that they send me along, any pertinent conversations they're having, so that I can fill you guys in, and if there's anything that we can do to help further this. From my own angles, I think I'll be reaching out to my CN contacts again to sort of rekindle this conversation. But they're a very motivated small committee trying to figure out ways to give safe and legal crossing of the Lillooet River by that CN bridge again. So kudos to them for keep pushing ahead, and I'll let you know if there's any discussion for us to have to see if we could support that. Couple of quick notes from the village side. The business license and pet license renewals are due by the 31st. Surprise, surprise, the village is hiring. So have a look online to see what positions are open. Winter parking regulations are still in effect. Keep an eye. The snow clearing has been from snow to rain, so it hasn't been too bad, but our crew's done a great job. But please respect the winter parking regulations. And just a reminder that the Pemberton Community Center is open, and it's offering fitness programs that meet the provincial health officers regulations. So just let people know that we are back in business on some of those activities if they want to look into it. And the last thing on my mayor's report is on the agenda. As we all know, the Bank of Nova Scotia, we've received the news that the Bank of Nova Scotia is looking at shutting down its Pemberton branch. There's a petition online. There have been a number of letters written to the head office at Bank of Nova Scotia. I didn't have a chance to read. I've got an email in my inbox just from this afternoon from the chamber. They've included their email as to how their letter in terms of how they've approached it. It's coming from a number of areas. People in our community are very upset. I believe there's like over 2,000 signings on the petition in a town our size. So that's pretty huge. So I just wanted to bring it here to discuss. Personally, I feel that it's a bad move. Quite honestly, personally, I feel that it was a decision made at a head office based on some numbers, not recognized. Looking at a town like Pemberton, going, "Oh, there's 2,900 people there, whatever it is, and they could bank online, not recognizing the level of growth and activity that we have here, and that, you know, we need this sort of service. I think it affects all of our communities. I think it affects Lilwat. So I would like to throw it out to council to talk about whether we want to write a letter, make a phone call, or any other suggestions you might have if you guys feel the same way. So I'll open it up to you guys. Go ahead, Councilor Craddock.
Yeah, I think all of the above, Mayor Richmond. I think if we lose the bank, it's a huge loss for the community, not only employment, but ability for local people that do not have access to transportation to not come into town and cash their checks. And the valley has about 5,000 people in here, and there's an awful lot of people that are going to be under a lot of hardship because they would have to make a trip to Whistler to cash checks. We don't have very good transit service right now. We're fighting for that, and that's been identified as a major issue. And I just think it's incomprehensible that they would be looking at closing something down without coming to the community and finding out what is going to be best for us long term. And I was floored when I heard that they were going to shut it down. So anything we can do at all, whether it be phone calls or many phone calls or letter writing, I'm certainly in full support of it. It's just a real sad day if we lose that the bank in our community, because in essence, we lose that bank and you want to get cash from a machine other than potentially them retaining their cash machine. There's going to be no personal service any longer.
And there's a lot of folks within our valley that aren't comfortable with electronic banking and are dependent on that service as well, I would say. I'm go ahead, Councillor Zant.
I was just going to say, I agree with everything you guys have said, and speaking with other members in town. I mean, they've brought up several concerns about shutting down, which would be lots, having to drive to Whistler again and more traffic on the road if that happens. During the library board meeting too, they were talking about they were going to write a letter to support to keeping the bank open. And they also mentioned that a lot of charitable donations over the past, I think the bank's been here 40 years, maybe 50 years. And that bank itself has made thousands upon thousands of dollars of charitable donations to Pemberton and its societies.
100%.
So that we would lose as well. But as we've said already, if we can write a letter, phone call, sign the petition, I'm in support of that.
That's a really good point, Councillor Zant. The Bank of Nova Scotia has been present at so many of our fundraisers and matched funds donated by the community. So yeah, that's a great point. Councillor Noble.
Definitely support writing letters, making calls, anything we can do to see what can be done to keep Scotiabank in town, and perhaps to find out the actual reason for this decision. I heard that potentially maybe the property sold, but that's hearsay. I don't know.
Interesting. Okay, well, how about a motion to have staff draft a letter for me to sign on our behalf to, what is the name, but the Bank of Nova Scotia head office, I guess we'll call it, expressing our shock and dismay over this decision and the reasons we feel, maybe the reasons we feel that it's not a good decision. So let's get a motion on that. Let's start with that first. Councillor Zant, second by Councillor Craddock. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Is that clear enough direction for the letter, Scott? Okay. And then I don't know if we need a motion for this, but maybe we could look for, or if you want to give me the direction through a motion to find a number, and I will see if I can actually find access to make a personal call. See if that's worth trying. You want a motion for that, Nikki and Ms. Gilmore?
I don't think, I think we can coordinate that. We
Okay.
can,
So you can help me find that, figure that out.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And actually another small comment in my mayor's report, one of the things that came out in my, or flagged with me or triggered with me through the meeting with Minister Osborne, just listening to the conversation, this is a new government, as we know, a relatively new government. As of December, the new ministers have received their mandate letters. There's some I would encourage you to actually read. to look at some of the ministries that affect us and their mandate letters. For instance, you know, the mandate letter through MOTI is to work with the Sea to Sky to find a regional transit. It's not quite worded that way, but within their mandate is to help us try to find regional transit. And so my point is, we talk about advocacy all the time and letter writing, and I feel sometimes, well, we did that and we tried. I want to remind us that it's advocacy and going to the provincial government to express our needs and trying to bang home some messages is an ongoing process. And the fact that a lot of ministries have just changed over ministers and new mandate letters have been issued, I would like us to keep that in mind moving forward, whether it's our child care grants or other things that we're working towards. I'd like to keep that in mind and keep up with our advocacy efforts, whatever those look like. But again, the new mandate letters are very interesting. I would encourage you to look at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, the mandate letter for the Ministry of Transportation, especially, and then climate change is a really interesting portfolio as well. Anyway, sorry, I said I was done. Any council reports? Go ahead, Councillor Zant.
There we go. I attended the library board meeting last week. Their AGM is coming up on January 27th. They're looking for opinions on the goals for the library for the next year to come. And they have their own goals that they have set forth, but they're looking to the board for their ideas. One thing they did mention, which I was pleased to hear, is that they are going to try to have more focus on mental health and how the library can help with that. They recognize that this pandemic has unfortunately made people stay at home more, and they're trying to brainstorm ideas of how to take books to people. Because we know that some people just can't make it to the library, but they're trying to think of ideas how they can take the books to the people that need them. So there was some talk about piggybacking on the current transit service or taxi delivery, or just volunteers basically that go out to different areas all the time can take a load of books with them if they're contacted. So it was really encouraging to hear. They're a great group of people and they're really committed to the town of Pemberton, that's for sure. So as I mentioned, the AGM is on the 28th. There is a registration link out there, I believe, on the library's website or the community center website. And yeah, that was the biggest thing, was that how they're trying to make the library more accessible to people, even if they have to do deliveries. But I was really impressed by that. I thought that was great for on their part. That's all I have to report for the time being.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Thanks for that. Let's go on to correspondence for action. The first one is from Mr. Andrew Ellett, co-founder of the Coast Mountain Cannabis, requesting review of the business license fees for cannabis-related businesses. Were we scheduled to look at our business license fee for that? Didn't we have a conversation?
Yes, the resolution actually indicates that we will be sending correspondence, that we will be reviewing the cannabis licensing fees in 2021. We were going to bring that back to committee of the whole to have a conversation.
So it is on the work plan, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Councillor Craddock?
No, I was just going to add that we'd already talked about that and it was going to come back. So.
Okay. Hey, can I get somebody to move the recommendation then? Councillor Zant, second by Councillor Craddock. All in favor, opposed, motion carries. Number 2 is from Mayor of Kamloops, seeking support for a resolution to be sent to the government of Canada calling for an overdose action plan to address the overdose crisis. Is this something our council would like to get on board with?
We could support it.
I would
Yeah.
say.
Sorry?
I think the overdose crisis has been kind of quiet, but only because of the pandemic, but it's still there. I still think it deserves our support.
Absolutely.
Sure.
It's raging again since the pandemic. So
Yeah.
Okay, so we're looking at some direction here. So council would like to support this resolution, send a letter of support for the resolution. Is that what, Ms.
That's
Fraser?
what
Or just take that same resolution and pass it and then send a letter?
Okay, yeah, that probably makes more sense. Yeah. Okay, can I get a motion to that effect?
So, that resolution, the whereases and everything will, okay.
Moved by Counselor Zant, seconded by Counselor Noble. Further discussion? In favor, opposed, motion carries. The next one is number 3 is from Mr. and Mrs. I don't know how to say their last name.
Dykowski.
Dykowski, from January 7th, requesting that the 1-year time limit to reapply for a development variance permit be waived. So this is back to Fernwood. As a result of our discussion, they're not supposed to be able to bring a development variance permit back for a full year. So the request is that we waive that if they were to bring, I would assume under the condition that they bring back the information or reply to the concerns of council expressed during that meeting. What would you like to do with this? Councilor, are we open? Go ahead, Councilor.
Thanks very much, Mayor Richmond. I think thinking back to Councillor Antonelli's point, she was just looking for more information on how they were going to develop the uphill side lot and the parking concerned with that. The 1-year time limit is a long time to put it off when people have put a lot of money into it and time and energy. So I would be open to having a look at it sooner than later. I'm not sure what staff would say about actually waiving the time frame, but I would certainly like to maybe hear from Mr. Chalmers and see what he thinks about maybe the ability to reconsider it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chalmers, did you want to provide comment?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I think the first step would be if council wants to consider it within the year, then this motion could be considered. Just a side note, it does require a 2/3 majority of council. It's an oddity of the act. The one thing that we've discussed with the applicant since the last meeting is that a lot of the information that was requested is of a level of detail that happens typically later in the stage of subdivision. So we need to try and find a sweet spot on exactly where that is to provide a different approach to how council entertain the variance. We don't know exactly what that would look like, and that would drive the timing.
Okay, thanks for that. So go ahead, Councilor Zant. Question.
Right, just to Mr. Chalmers, just a little clarification. So let's say we can pass it to allow it to come back, it would be June. Does that allow, within that time frame, does that allow staff to do the research they need and then bring that information back by June? Or can that not begin until June?
Mr. Mayor, through you, really, there's kind of two separate issues here. The one before you tonight is whether you would entertain the hearing this matter again before within the year. So I can't recall exactly when it was refused, but I believe it was about a month ago. So if you want to hear it within the year, then you would pass this resolution. That kind of authorizes staff to continue working on it. Then we would need to try and do a regroup on how we prepare and present information to satisfy council. And a lot of that will not be staff research. It's information that's generated by the applicant, but typically isn't generated until the non-discretionary part of the process is over. So that's what's plagued this one. And we would need to look at how we can satisfy council with information that isn't typical at this stage of the process. That's what we would need to work through. But tonight's resolution would give you the ability to start that process and enable staff to accept and begin working on a new application.
So yeah, it's up to the applicant to fulfill some of the, or to fill some of the gaps, so to speak, of the information that was asked from council. It's not up to staff to go out and look for those answers. If this waiver of the year's notice or requirement would allow them to reapply, bring forward that information to staff. Staff could evaluate it and bring it then to council for us to have a look at. But it's not up to our staff to go out and find that information. Councillor Noble.
Would support the resolution.
So, Councillor Craddock, the resolution is to waive the year's requirement and therefore allow staff to work with the applicant or move forward with the applicant. Is that the motion? Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if we could add to it that any cost associated with it for staff time be at the developer's expense.
Staff
That-
comment on that?
That
ahead.
is typical of our development procedures bylaw, so it's already a requirement, and we will ensure that we bill back any time. We did have a proposed resolution, if you wanted to hear that, that the request to have the 1-year time limit waived for reapplication of the development variance permit for 1368 Fernwood Drive be approved, and that the applicants be advised they may reapply at any time.
Mr. Craddock, you are the mover. Does that satisfy?
I think that's what I said. Thank you very much for clarifying that.
That's what I heard. Moved by Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Noble. Further discussion? In favor, opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Next up, number 4 is correspondence from the BC Softball Association. How would council like to approach this one? Go ahead, Councillor Zant.
I just noticed in their letter, they didn't specifically ask for a certain amount.
I think they're hoping for anything.
See,
Did they,
I'd be happy to support kids going to play softball. There's no amount. And is this something we bring up during the budget in the next 3 or 4 months?
well, no, I think if personally, I think if this is something we wanted to consider, we could put it towards the rec fund,
EDIF stuff?
or the PDIF fund, and look at it there. My question would be, are there members of our community engaged in this?
I
Go
thought within the document it did say there were.
That are actually competing at that level? Ms. Fraser, you have something to add there?
So just the criteria of all our grant funding programs is that it is to the benefit of the Village of Pemberton and or SLRC Area C and or both. Unless we have kids in our community who are actually going to be on the team and going, I don't know that they would qualify, as they wouldn't meet the criteria. I would also think that if we did have some youth on our team in our community, we might already know about them, or there would be opportunity for them to make application for funding through different programs for themselves to go. I worry that it opens up a bit of a door to have all of organizations from all around the province contact us for money. My guess is this has been sent out to every municipality across the province and every organization they can think of, which is what a lot of community groups are doing right now, because the funding programs are really focusing on COVID relief as opposed to other, the broader picture. That's just the experience that we've been finding over the last few months.
I would agree with Ms. Fraser's comments there. I think this is not quite as local as our PDIF funding is designed for.
I agree. Thank you, Ms. Fraser. Appreciate the clarity.
Councillor Craddock, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I'd like to move to receive and file.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have 4 items for information. Would anybody like to pull any of them out? None. Can I get a motion to receive those 4 items? Councillor Zant, seconded by Councillor Craddock. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Decision on late business. No late business, notice of motion. Question period. Ms. Kennedy, do we have anybody?
No, Mr. Mayor, we don't have any hands raised at this time.
Well, either we just did such a thorough job of discussing everything that we left no room for questions, or we put everybody to sleep, one of the two. I don't know. Okay, seeing none, I will recess the regular meeting and we'll move back in camera. So let's take, I don't know, 2-3 minutes here and we'll restart the. With that, I'll reopen the regular council meeting. We don't have any rise with the report, so I will look for a motion to adjourn this regular council meeting. Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Zant, all in favor. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.